unknown space, justice is a long way away.
Hello, my friends, and welcome to the Space Game Junkie Podcast. I, as always, am your co-host, Brian. And joining me, as always, is your co-host, Spaz.
Magnetic boots are optional.
Your co-host, Julie.
It's called the Windy City because last night the wind ripped the trees right out of the ground.
Damn. Your co-host, Thorsten. Uh-oh. Thorsten? Buddy?
He's been having Discord issues with audio.
Oh, no. Okay. Oh, there he goes. All right. Well, he was here a second ago. He'll be back. Do it. The joys of doing it live. Your co-host, Jacob.
Hexagons are bestagons.
Nice. And your co-host, just under the wire, David.
Yeah, still waiting for food replicators to get us the correct amount of calories. I'm dying here.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I thought you just had dinner or something.
I did.
Oh, gosh. Friends, before we get started, I just wanted to give a quick disclaimer. They've been doing construction on my apartment complex, and it's right underneath my apartment. That's where the carports are that they're strengthening it because of earthquakes. And so they're doing it like right under my apartment. So it's been bang, bang, scrape, scrape all day. They seem to have stopped for now. So maybe they're at lunch. But just in case you hear when I'm talking and you hear some kind of noise, that's probably it. I've turned up my gate as much as possible. So hopefully you won't hear anything. But if you do, I apologize. There's not much I can do about it. Even closing the window won't help because they are right underneath the apartment. And I don't want to close the window anyway because it gets really stuffy in here real fast. So, friends, we have a guest today joining us from Boston, Kevin Lynn of WX3 Labs, to talk about his latest entry into the Starcom series, Unknown Space, which comes out next week. Welcome back, Kevin.
Hey, thanks for having me back. It's good to be here.
Oh, it's good to have you because I loved the first game. Absolutely. I'm going to admit I didn't finish it. I don't finish many games. Please don't hold that against me. But
I'm the same way.
I did play a lot of it because, folks, if you're unaware, Starcom is a game about mostly exploration, and it's one of the few space adventure games besides like Starflight, I think, that really nails the feeling of exploration really, really well. Like space is a big place, and there's all kinds of crazy stuff out there. And ooh, what's that way? What's that way? It really nails that feeling. So. I played a little bit for the stream for the background of the stream today. Played about half an hour of it, I think, and that feeling is still intact. So if you're into space games for the exploration of it all, and you haven't played either of the Starcom games, do yourself a favor and get them now. So we had you on for a while ago. It was a while ago, years and years ago, for the first game. And I'm glad to see the first game did well enough to warrant a sequel.
Yeah, and thanks for that comparison to Starflight, which was one of the big inspirations from my childhood. That kind of was the game that I played when I was 10, and was like, oh, I want to make something like this when I grow up.
I'd say you did the right thing by taking out the lander stuff and making it a little more abstract. You did the right thing there because. As much as I love the Starflight games, my God, those lander parts can be whoo. So I appreciate that you abstracted that a bit.
Yeah, I think that's one feature that kind of was unclear how to modernize that, and I think a lot of games have made attempts to figure out how to do the planet side stuff without being boring, and I kind of went with a short and sweet, just kind of. The anomalies where you get a reward and something to interact with, but it doesn't. You don't feel bogged down in it.
Yeah, it's really just get to the good stuff. Like, folks, if you haven't played Starflight, half the game is landing on. And this was in 1986. This was very immersive and cool. It did get tedious every now and again, but it was very cool that you could drive around planets and you could find artifacts and logs and things like that. It was very cool, but it also padded out the game a lot. It really did. And again, I love Starflight, but oh boy, sometimes those landing sequences, those lunar, those buggy sequences would be So I really appreciate that you just went right to it and be like, this is what's down there. Not going to waste your time.
Yeah. So we have like most of the planet, all the planets have these kind of unique illustrations, kind of get your imagination going, showing you what's down there, and then a short description of what you find. And some planets get more complicated, like it's sort of a whole choose your own adventure down there. But in general, most planets have like a little short story that you can quickly get through, and then your reward, and then get out and move on to the next system or the next baddie.
Yeah, because that's what you really want. That's what you really want, is to like get out to the good stuff. And exploring planets can be fun if done right, but it's not done, like you said, it's hard to do right. It's really, I can think of some games that have done it really wrong. Really, I can think, I won't say the names, but there was, oh boy, but getting it right. I think the tack you have chosen, for doing it in these games is pitch perfect, I think.
Thanks. Yeah, I spent a lot of time. So I don't know if I might have mentioned it this last time I was on, but Starcom started as a Flash game way back in like 2009.
Oh.
And in that version, the planets didn't do anything at all. They were just like window dressing. And so with Nexus, I was like, oh, well, I want to have the planets do something so that the player gets kind of like, the idea was that they were going to be like a treasure chest in Diablo, where like you fight the baddie and you get to interact with the planet in some way, and that's the reward. And I experimented with a number of kind of mini game type things, and just like, I spent quite a lot of time, and then like just had to yank all that stuff out, because I was like, this is just like, you don't want the reward to be like a less fun game than the game that you're currently playing. So it's just like, it's a loot box, it's got some treasure, it's got a unique image, and maybe has like, can kick off a new adventure. You might encounter something new that you've never seen before. But in general, like, if you want to be through with them quickly, you can just, see the pretty picture, get your reward, and move on.
Yeah, and that is very important, because we all have more games to play and less time to play them. So that's a tough balance. Like remember back in the day with Starflight, oh, this is your game for the next 6 to 8 months.
Yeah, exactly. Like, you didn't have a lot of choice. These days, there is we're really kind of living in a very golden era for gaming. And I think
really
especially for indie games. Like, and people, like, all indie devs are always moaning about how much competition there is, and I don't claim to be immune to that complaint as well. But it really is. This is just like a great time to be an indie game player or developer. It was always hard, and it's still hard, but it's like, 15 years ago, you couldn't. It was really hard to get your game in front of people, and with Steam and streamers and influencers and so forth, people, like you, who are like surfacing these games to people, that's something that can happen now.
Yeah, like before Steam, really, like if you were an indie developer, good luck. I mean, like exactly. You had your website, and maybe you could find a few people to buy your games, but like it was like, unless you were like someone like Matrix, who was big enough to have box games in some specialty stores, that was, you weren't going to get on the shelf of Electronics Boutique, or
right,
whatever, yeah. So I agree that we are in I think this is like I think the 90s was like the first golden age, because so much stuff, happened in the 90s that we're still benefiting from today. And, I think you're right, though, that we are in like a second golden age of gaming, because there's so much. I mean, there's so much stuff, but there's also so much good stuff. Oh my God, there's so much good stuff. Holy moly.
Yeah, the ability, like the tools have just gotten so much better. And we've learned so much, like developers in general, like, there's so much information. There are so many channels where we can learn stuff about, like, oh, how did this developer, do this technique? And then once one person's figured it out, then everybody else benefits from that knowledge. And it is kind of a little bit of a challenge, because it's sort of like a Red Queen race, where we just sort of, as developers, have to just kind of like you can't be making a game that was great 10 years ago. You have to be making stuff that's just as fun as the most fun game a player can play now. And that's obviously really hard, but it's a time when, an indie developer, not the majority of them, a small minority, in fact, are able to make a living. And I'm very lucky to be in that position.
Yeah. It's great because it feels like you're making the game you want to play,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this was kind of my dream game, and 20 years ago I didn't have anywhere near the skills, and it took a long time before I was able to sort of figure out like any of the stuff. And then Unity came along, and that did so much of the stuff that I didn't have to figure out. Like, you still have to learn a lot of nuts and bolts, but there are huge amounts of stuff you don't have to dive down into the weeds and learn the details of, like, audio processing and, file IO and so forth.
And what is the game built on? Remind me.
It's Unity.
Okay.
So it's Unity 2020, which is a few years old, but that was the most stable version at the time, and I kind of made the judgment call that was the safest one to go on. And the last game was Unity as well. I have considered looking at other things, but I think the right call was Unity. They've had a lot of controversy in the last few years.
Yes. Oh my, yes.
But yeah,
you could say that.
I was kind of dismayed when they made that initial announcement, because I have been a booster for them. I've been like really. There was a period of time where it was very popular to kind of dunk on Unity because people saw all these asset flips and so forth. But I think it really is a great engine, and I was really dismayed when they made that announcement. I'm glad they walked it back, but it was really kind of a boneheaded move, because they basically walked it back so far that they had to give up some stuff. And if they just sort of done that up front and had never done the first thing, they would have just gotten so much free goodwill. So it was really kind of it was really a shame that they stumbled out of the gate with that. And I get where they're coming from. Like, they have been losing money for years, and they eventually obviously have to be profitable. But just the way that they announced it was just terrible.
Well, let me ask you then, will your next game still be in Unity, do you think? Are you going to stick with it?
Is there a next game?
Yeah, that's both are good questions. I'll answer the first one. So that if and when there is a next Starcom, I will probably evaluate at the time. I'm currently still leaning towards Unity, but Unity has sort of said, okay, we're a little bit riskier. We backpedaled, but I'm going to definitely be paying attention to whether or not they kind of stay the course and don't try. Like, it's okay for them to do stuff and try to make money, but they have to, give developers transparency and the information they need. They can't just be like, oh, your game is about to launch in 6 months, we're changing up the price scheme, and now your business model doesn't work. You have to let them know at the time they make the choice what they're getting into. And as far as, will there be a sequel? I think so. Right now, my current plan is to continue working on Unknown Space. There are a number of things that I would like to add to it post-launch. Like, for example, there are, I created some tools for myself for creating the content. And because they were authored in the tool as opposed to built on it, they could theoretically be distributed to players and modders and creators. So if people wanted to create their own stories, they could use the same tools that I use to when I create anomalies and missions and, stories, I'm doing that through something that could theoretically be distributed as, as a sort of like a side product to the game. So if people said, hey, I want to craft a story using this game engine or using the game itself, and maybe even set in the Starcom universe, but maybe there's another distant galaxy that someone wants to craft themselves and share with their friends, they'll be able to put that on the workshop. That's something that I'm hoping to do. Not promising yet, but I think there's pretty good chance, maybe 80% chance that'd be wonderful.
I love games. I love games that have good workshop support. So important.
Yeah, so it's definitely sure you will have implement a workshop support.
There is workshop support already so players are already sharing their ship designs.
I didn't notice that. Okay.
Yeah, so the I need to investigate that a little bit more. So like if you pop into the workshop, like the front page like looks blank, so you have to then go to most popular. But in game, you can like take your blueprint and then click on ship designs, and then if you're logged into Steam, you should see the workshop button, and then you'll be able to load your workshop and share it, and then see what other popular ones are up there. So players have uploaded a lot of ships. I haven't actually looked recently to see how many there are up there, but I did see. I know that they're pretty active with ship designs. So the next step would be to expand it out to some other areas. Like I think I'd sort of experimentally invite some people who are like, if some players, because I know some players have been like super active in just already kind of like dissecting the save files and figuring out what they can, kind of hack up and change. And so I think some of those players would be interested in like, let's see, in creating some content as well. Just like initially, maybe like an anomaly. They can create their own anomaly, and this will be an anomaly that like will randomly appear in games if you've added it. Yeah, I'm looking at the workshop and I see that there's currently 908 player uploaded.
Oh my god. That's astounding. Yeah, I'm looking at some of these. These are amazing. I didn't even know this was here. Oh boy.
Yeah, I'm looking at some. Clearly, some of these are not like they've bent the rules on what they must have changed their what do you call it? They must have unlocked some unauthorized modules and levels. This guy, what the Ivanova? That is huge. There's no way that's. And it's built on just a cruiser bridge, so they've definitely tweaked some things in their save file.
This thing's great.
If I may, I have a question.
Go ahead.
And one of the things I don't like to do is kind of a little research on people around the show, and I've read an article. I don't know if it was by you, but it was certainly about you on GameDeveloper.com. And one of the quotes here kind of struck a chord with me, because I talked to any one of a number of people involved in various different creative efforts that kind of face the same kind of thing, and I wanted to know how you dealt with it. And the quote is this: it says, "I think this pattern was driven by a fear of failure. As long as they kept it in experimental pre-alpha side project mode, I never had to confront the possibility of putting my hard work out there and failing completely." And I've dealt with that in my book I've written. And how did you deal with that?
I wish that is definitely my quote. I wish I could give like a simple answer that would let anybody just sort of who had that feeling just get by it. But
if it were that easy, people would have figured it out.
Exactly. I got through it, but I haven't gotten through it in a way that I can always like. It still is something that I deal with, like just putting myself out there. It's just not something that I'm naturally wired to do, but is obviously you can't be a game developer if you never put. I mean, you can be a game developer, but you can't be a commercially successful game developer unless you put your games out there. And it's been a struggle every time I put something new out there, or do something that I think is stretching my boundaries a little bit, or maybe I'm like worried that there'll be that players won't like this thing, or it's just really hard. And I don't have a magic solution for getting through that. Most of the time it's just kind of revving up to it, just kind of getting into the state, and then just sort of pulling the Band-Aid off and just being like, okay, I've done the most I can do. It's as ready. It's not going to be substantially more ready in a week or a month. So I just have to bite the bullet and put it out there. And it was good that the first thing that I put out, which was not even onto Steam, but it was just a closed beta, it had a positive reaction. Actually, let me back that up a little bit. I did, even before that, I put the game into a festival much earlier version, which was still not too far off from the version that made it to playtesters, and it got rejected from the festival, and that really kind of set me back. So it I'm never was really 100% sure what happened. I have a sneaking suspicion that it slipped through the cracks and then passed. And then once the end date had passed for submissions, they were like, "Oh shit, we'll just reject everybody who we didn't get to." But it really had kind of it really sort of set me back, kind of just psychologically on motivation to be like, "Oh, well, maybe this game isn't as good as I think it is." But then when I eventually came back to it and put it in front of people who were the core audience, they were like, "Oh yeah, we want this game." And then that was what was able to give me the mental energy to get the first game onto early access.
And I have to say, I really appreciate like all these jams on Itch and all these festivals and things where people can put their ideas out there to get feedback. It's really been great to see games kind of blossom out of those. You know, it's just
I don't even know how. Like, I have never done a jam before, and I just don't know how these people do it. Like, I think maybe I might be like not a good person for jams because I'm such a perfectionist that I don't think I could. I don't think I could like get a feature to the point where it's good enough for the jam and then move on to the next thing. I think I would get stuck on this one thing and be like, "Oh no, it could be a little bit better. And so I would have spent the entire jam getting like the opening menu screen to look right, and then there wouldn't be a game behind it at that point.
Well, go ahead.
What I was going to say is you have a problem with good enough.
I do. I think I can get to. I think I have a good. I can stop at great enough, but I can't stop at good enough. And I don't know whether I'd be better or worse off if I could stop at good enough. Because there definitely is a trade-off.
I was just going to say that, one of the reasons I bring this up is because, and I was talking with Richard Bartle, and if somebody says, "Richard who?" He and Roy Trubshaw invented multi-user dungeons. And
did he come up with the sort of that player categorization scheme?
Yes, that was him. And the thing is, he said once that he felt that most of the advancements in gaming would come from indie developers. And I think it's really kind of a shame that more indie developers aren't in a position to get past that fear. And I've dealt with it. I said, what if when it finally gets out of the editor, nobody wants to read the book? And I've got a good friend who started out as an ichthyologist, and now he's an executive producer. And I think if more indie developers could kind of get past this fear, think of the advancements in gaming and the original ideas that would get out there.
That's a good point. I'm glad you mentioned that, because that reminded me of something that I forgot to mention in your initial question. It was, I did have an advantage the second time. So the first time after I got swatted down, the second time when I actually got sort of the energy to go forward, I did have, I was lucky that at that point I had, a very supportive wife who was really good at kind of like being like, whatever happens, we're going to be fine. And just kind of like give me that extra little push of motivation, which I think, it doesn't have to be a wife, but maybe just anybody, if you have a friend or someone, that I think that can give a lot of energy too.
Yeah, that's definitely important to have the right people. Like the Space Game Junkie thing, if I didn't have a wife who understood that this is a positive creative outlet, I'd have a problem.
Yeah. You've been doing this for quite a while. When did you start
2011.
2011. Is that when the podcast started, or is that when you started kind of the Space
Game Junkie started in 2011. The podcast started in 2013, I think. Yeah.
2013.
Yeah.
Wow, that is impressive that you've gone for that long. I mean, so many. It
took me a while. Sorry to interrupt. It took me a while to find a thing that worked. Like I tried many other things, that just fell in their face. But this is the thing that worked. I think it's maybe just picking the one niche and focusing on that. That helped me, and my ADHD-addled brain kind of stick with it. But wait, how long have you been? How long have you? So when did you first make the first prototype of Starcom? Like, how long have you been doing this?
So I made my first Flash game was in 2008, and it was like a tower defense game. And then the first Starcom was also Flash, and that was 2009. And so in the subsequent years, I kind of as I don't know if it was Julie who mentioned kind of the false starts or not quite committing myself, the sort of pseudo hobby mode until 2017, 2018. And it was 2018 that I decided, okay, I'm going to go for it. I'm going to, try to jump into the deep end and actually make a product and sell it on Steam. So I had been doing it started game development almost 10 years before I was actually at the point where I was launching something commercially.
Oh, I mean, that's quite a, how do some celebrities put it? Like a 18-year overnight success, like that kind of thing.
Yes, exactly. I had been working in games, like my initial like hobby projects. Like one of them, caught the eye of a local developer, and they're like, "Oh, you should do some work for us." And so I was getting my feet wet in like working in the industry, but not really in the sort of the front end game development. I had started in web development, and there aren't a lot of game developers with, or at least there weren't at the time, networking and database experience. And so that was kind of, they were like, oh, well, games a bit, and you also have these other skills that we don't have. So I had gotten some experience there, but not really anything that prepared me for the big leap.
So wait, what pushed you to the big leap? What happened? What happened that pushed you?
Just having worked on it for so long, feeling that I needed to either admit to myself that this was just going to be a hobby, or that I had to do some kind of plunge, and like commit. So I think I made the decision in early 2018 that if like I was going to get something with sort of market proof that year, so I was going to, which basically the simplest thing meant Steam Early Access, where people could show me by buying the product that there was a market for this game. And so that was, just kind of a leap of faith, really, but with some helping hands pushing me along.
Well, I talked to someone who's owns this tiny little publishing company that I'm working with, and I said one day, I said, what if nobody ever reads this book? And she had looked at me and said, how many people will read it if you don't finish it? And I think it's like the same thing with games. If nobody pushes, if you don't push through things like that, we would never have books and movies like The Martian. It was just some dude, that
right.
did that. So this is why I think it's just one line in an interview, but I think it's an important thing that a lot of people, like myself included, have to learn how to deal with, and you've done it successfully. So bravo!
Thank you. Yeah, it's hard, and I think anybody, even if you don't find the level of success that you're hoping for, I think you'll often find a level of success that's still rewarding, like just a player or a dozen players who like really got something out of your game or your book can be like just super rewarding, just knowing that you like gave someone some pleasure in their life that wasn't there before.
And so now the game, now they're doing. So did I hear you right that you're doing this full time now? Like they've done well enough that you're. Oh wow!
Yes.
That's wonderful. Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, it's I don't know how, I always feel a little bit awkward talking about it because it's sort of like you don't want to humble brag, but you also kind of want to acknowledge that you're in a kind of lucky privileged position. But yes, it's some indie game developers manage to reach this level of success, but it is admittedly a minority.
Yeah, I would say it's not humble bragging to at least people who know the struggles and challenges that go along with indie game development.
Well, we talk with some of these other developers, and just like you said, Brian, as people say, "Oh, it was an overnight success." Yes, it was an overnight success, and I had to double mortgage my house.
Right.
Yeah, I really can't think of, of the various, like, I've followed a lot of and researched a lot of other game developers, particularly in the indie space, and it's really, I can't think of anybody who had a successful game right out of the gate. Like, their first effort was a success. Like, almost like they all have at least one failed game before their first commercial success, or they had like the same game iterated over and over again for many, many years. And so they either had to, like, just exhaust their savings and take a risk, or they had some backing of, someone who supported them. But yeah, it's definitely nobody, including myself, gets it right on the first try.
Well, it's interesting. They have I forget the name of the publisher, but they have these books about games and game developers. There's these small white books, and there's one on Spelunky. And it's a fascinating journey about how that game went from iteration to iteration to iteration to failure to iteration to failure, and finally exploded. And that was a fascinating journey to read. That, you're right, doesn't happen often. I wish it would happen more.
Yeah, you say there's a book series about.
I can't. Hang on. I'll try to remember after the show. It's a publisher. They publish books about video games or their developers. Like, they have one on remember the old text-based adventure game ZZT? Remember that one?
ZZT.
ZZT. It was like a shareware ASCII-based adventure game that you could actually build worlds and levels for, that people are still building worlds and levels for. Works on DOS, and they made a book about that. And I think there's one on Jagged Alliance. I can't remember the name of the publisher though, but they have several now, and I have a couple of them, and they are just fun. It's fun to read about the journey that all these developers have to take between failure to success. And like you said,
if you remember what that is, I'd love to take a look at that.
I think I put them. Yeah, they're in a different room. I'll have to remember after the show, but yeah, it's a whole publishing group that publishes these books. I think you can get them digitally as well, but I cannot. If anyone in the chat or any of the co-hosts can remember what the hell I'm talking about and chime in, that'd be great. But there's little, like, white books about video games. There's several of them now. Is it boss fight books? Maybe. Maybe. Yep. It is boss fight books. Thank you.
Whoa.
Well done.
Thank you, chat.
Thank you, Disco Treat. Here's the ZZT book I was talking about.
Yeah.
And they did one. Yeah, they did one on Spelunky.
It's sort of got like an O'Reilly style cover.
Yes, exactly. Thank you, Disco Treat. Thank you. Yes, that's exactly who that is. They have several books, and they have one on Baldur's Gate 2, Metal Gear Solid, World of Warcraft. Wow, they have one on GoldenEye. Wow, they have a lot of books. I only have like 3 of them. I didn't realize there were like 30 of them. Anyway, yeah, those are, if you really want to get into like the nitty gritty of how some games became a success, those are really fun, and they're not expensive. They're like $8 to $10 each, I think. Those are great books, folks. If you're interested in game development at all, even if you don't plan to be a developer, but will want to learn more of the nitty gritty, these are really good books. Thank you, Disco Treat. Could not remember that damn name.
They look interesting.
Yeah. I've read
Minesweeper.
Yeah. I've only read 2 so far. I've read the ZZT one and the Spelunky one, but they were both great reads. And now I see they have several others that I want to read. I definitely want to read about Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic, for example.
In reading your article here, one of the things I noted, again, that was one of these things, is I wanted to create a game like that, vast open universe of exploration. And I think that's maybe one of the What's some advice that somebody gave me once that was one of the best pieces of advice? They said, do it first for you instead of somebody else. And we see a lot of indie developers here, and they say the same kind of thing. Well, I did it for me, but well, I'll look at all these other people that liked it.
Yeah, I think that I've heard varying advice on that, sort of on that vein. Obviously, you need to there's always the chance that maybe you go too niche and it's something that maybe doesn't have enough of an audience. But I think that it's really, you're just not going to be able to make it. You're not going to have the focus and also the right, you need to have your own taste and know what you're going for. Otherwise, you just won't be able to make it, because you'll just be like beating your head against the wall trying to make a game that you think someone else wants. But if you're not passionate about it yourself, you're not going to just have the right mindset to produce what somebody else wants. If that makes sense.
No, it's really true of any creative endeavor. If you don't have the passion for it, it's not going to come through. Like if you're doing it just to go through the motions, it's going to be obvious to anyone who sees it.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of a problem. Like I think some indie developers see like a game that looks super successful, and they're like, "Oh, that doesn't look too technically challenging. I could make something like that."
Oh my god!
But if
how many Among Us clones did we see? After it's like, oh my god.
So unless you're really I think it's fine to see something successful and say like, oh, I could make that, I want to make something like that, but you have to really want to make it. You have to be excited for that game. You can't be just like, oh, well, it looks like Vampire Survivor clones are popular now. I like them okay. I'll make one of those. I think you really have to you'd have to love Vampire Survivors or Survivor type games for it to be worth it for you to choose that as your project.
And I will tell you what, we have played several of what do we call them, Bullet Heavens? Bullet Heavens?
Yeah. Yep.
We've played a lot of those on this very channel, and some of them are amazing, and then some of them are like, what were they? I'm not gonna say which. You're like, what were you guys thinking? What happened here? I'm sorry.
What would you say was the difference between a Bullet Hell and a Bullet Heaven?
Well, I guess
easy example. A bullet hell is where the screen is filled with bullets and you have to dodge as many of them as you can. Bullet heaven, you are the one spraying the bullets.
Oh, that makes sense.
That's a really simple. I didn't even think of it that way, but that's a really simple way to put it. Yeah.
That does sound like I'm sure there's audience for both. To me personally, that latter one sounds kind of more appealing because it kind of also flows into sort of like the feeling good power level thing of just like it gives like a logical place for you to be like, oh, well, here's like if you get upgrades, your bullets are gonna splinter off or do something cooler, and that will be fun.
Oh yeah, there are a lot of great games that are bullet heaven games. Like Void Scrappers is one.
So many good ones.
Nova Drift, which recently released, is really
what was
good.
I can never remember the name of that other one. You remember the name, Spaz, but I can never remember the name of that other one that we just talked about like a week or two ago.
Well, there's Void Scrappers. There's
yep.
There is Nova Drift.
Yeah,
there is.
There's another one. I couldn't remember the name of it, but you remember the name of it.
Trying to think offhand which one you're talking about.
Don't remember.
There are a lot of great ones. Yeah. That's the thing.
Yeah, there are a lot of great ones. I was thinking there was another spacey one that was really, really good.
That one with a capital ship, maybe?
Oh, I can't remember.
You know the ones, Pass.
Anyway, so yeah,
do, but
Void Scrappers is, if you haven't played any of these, Kevin, Void Scrappers is a great place to start. And yeah, they do quickly build on the power fantasy of, oh, now my gun shoots 3 bullets. Oh, and now those bullets explode. Oh, now those bullets are rockets. Ooh, yes. It's just constantly making fun decisions about how to murder all these incoming mobs. Yeah, it's a really
that is something that I kind of folded in a bit to Unknown Space from Nexus, because in Nexus you had a number of different weapons. But I think that they kind of so for example, you had missiles in Nexus, but in general, you could there was seeing the upgrades were just sort of fairly straightforward things like range, speed, turn rate, explosion. Whereas with Unknown Space, there are some like branching off things, like you can get the swarm ones where like after you fire them, they split into 3, or the fission ones where they like are just like become these like super powerful nukes. So I did take a little bit of a cue from some of those games.
Now, if I'm remembering correctly, the first game did not have auto fire like the new one does. Am I remembering that correctly?
I believe you are correct. Yeah, so auto fire is new. There's just a huge number of quality of life type things that didn't make it in, and some of them are ones where I just didn't have a sense as to like how important they were. One was that I just I added during Unknown Space because players had asked for it, and I just didn't realize like how big of a deal players thought it was to add autopilot, like smart autopilot, where you could just pick a destination on the map and your ship would sort of figure out the warp gateways and flingers to sort of fast travel there as quickly as possible. And players were just like, "Oh my gosh, this is great! Can you update Nexus with this?"
Oh wow, I didn't know this game had that. Oh my gosh, that's great.
Yeah, it turned out to be like one of the most of like the quality of life enhancements. It was like probably number one in terms of players like giving feedback and being like, yes, like more like this.
Now, did the first game have gamepad support? I don't quite remember.
It did. Yeah, it did. It was, I think, maybe not fully as polished, and I'm still iterating on this one, learning, because I don't play most games with a gamepad, so I've had to kind of learn what works and then also listen to sort of put versions out there, and players will come back and say like, oh, I think that this change would work a little bit better. Whereas with most features, I kind of intuitively know while I'm iterating on it what's improving it. But with gamepad, I really can iterate only so far and then put it out there, and players are like, oh, well, actually what the convention is this being the how you zoom or bring up the menu and so.
Do you not have it? Do you not have a gamepad? Question mark?
Yeah, I do. I have an Xbox gamepad and a Steam Deck. Yeah.
Okay, good. A Steam Deck. Ooh, nice.
Yeah, so like one player said like, oh, what you should do is if you like detect that they're on the deck, immediately boost the font of everything without them having to do that. So that's one thing that a player suggested. So like automatically if it says, oh, you're on the deck, we're going to just like dial up the font in options. You can go back and change them later, but like we think this is the right scale for text. So that's like an example of things where players had to tell me, because I might have noticed eventually like playing on the deck, oh, like the font's kind of too small for me to read, but I'm 50, so like everything's too small for me to read.
I hear that. I totally hear that. I didn't know games could do that, like detect that, oh, this is on a Steam Deck. You have to
Yeah, it was a little bit weird or a little bit tricky because there is an SDK that Steam provides, but it's like a C++ library, and so like integrating it into Unity is not super smooth.
Oh god.
And so there are several third-party libraries that people have created, and I use one called what's it called? Face Punch. It's by some like well-known developer, and I implemented it, but it hasn't been updated to the latest version, and so it has most of the Steam features, but it did not have the ability to detect deck. And so I actually had to sort of add in a little bit of function to guess based on the GPU whether it was a deck, because it turns out that all the decks have a custom GPU that you can't get on any other device.
Oh, very nice. Very nice.
It's a workaround hack. Like, I don't love it because if like the next version of the deck has a different name of its GPU, it won't work. But hopefully by then someone will have released. Hopefully Steam gets around to being like, hey, let's provide, a Unity SDK.
Like how many of our developers use Unity? We should provide.
Yeah, it's like 40% of games on Steam are developed with Unity. So
yeah, I that was more than I thought. Honestly, I thought it would be like 30-ish, 20-ish, 30-ish. That's a lot of games on Unity. Holy
it's
moly.
A lot. And I mean, it would make logically, it sort of makes more sense for Unity to do it, but Steam, like Valve has money and Unity doesn't, so it's probably more likely to
Well, Valve also has more incentive to make stuff work with their stuff. You know?
Right, exactly. Yeah, like Unity, I think is like kind of their business model is actually more mobile. Like it's not nothing for PC, but like they're currently focused on mobile, whereas Steam gets like, you know, maybe like the AAA games, not many of those are built with Unity, but clearly a non-trivial percentage of their revenue comes from Unity games. So they hopefully, you know, presumably, you know, they're all listening right now and they're now getting on that.
I wish. Like, yeah, some big indie games I think are on Unity. Like, isn't Vampire Survivors on Unity, I think?
No, Vampire Survivors, I think, was like built on some JavaScript, but like a lot of huge ones like Among Us, Hearthstone, Subnautica.
Wow, yeah, those are big.
Ori and the Blind Forest. Yeah, like so many that you don't realize are because they don't have the Unity splash screen, because Unity kind of did this thing where they're like, oh, if you pay for the full version, you can take the splash screen off. And then it created this weird negative incentive loop where like only cheap games had the splash screen and players associated the Unity logo with cheap games. And then the people who bought the thing were then like, well, we don't want to be associated with cheap games, so we're going to pay to take your logo off, which was probably not Unity's business model when they decided to do that, but
this is a terrible idea. Absolutely.
I guess so. It was a little bit of a terrible idea. It does have sort of the incentive that like there is now an incentive for developers to actually, they got rid of, I think in the latest version, one of the things they backpedaled on when they had to sort of buy back the developer goodwill is they said, okay, everybody can take our logo off. Like whether or not you're paying, you get to take the logo off. And you just have to pay if you're over, I forget what it is. I think it's like $1 million per calendar year or something like that.
Okay. That's probably why I'm seeing it less and less on the games I'm covering now. I'm seeing that Unity splash screen far less.
Yeah. So it's now completely optional for everybody now. So, probably not their ideal scenario, but I don't know how they can like undo that association, and they may just and it may not matter that much because it's not like they're selling their engine to players. Game developers know that whether or not hopefully know whether or not Unity is the right engine for them.
Well, I'm honestly glad that they're maybe that's why I was confused, because Val, I don't want to say your name wrong. Valkrisa? I'm sorry, I don't want to say your name wrong. They're saying that Vampire Survivors moved to Unity last year, so that's probably why I got it. That's why I probably got it in the brain. The brain.
Oh, you're maybe more up to date than I am, because I think I looked at it like right after it launched and was just because I was kind of curious, just as like a little side thing. I'm just interested to see who's using which engines. And maybe when they first launched, they were on whatever.
Chris is asking if Unreal is still about. Yeah, there are a bunch of games that use Unreal these days, I think, right?
Yeah, they have a really impressive, their visuals, their out-of-the-box visuals are really good, and I know that they're very popular with their blueprints, which allow for some pretty sophisticated game development without really much coding, because it's kind of like a visual environment. But they're definitely, they have nowhere near the market of Unity in terms of games released, but they're still definitely like a big player in the PC market. Trying to think of a big title that I know is Unreal, but they're definitely.
Didn't Guardians of the Galaxy use it? I think Guardians of the Galaxy.
That makes sense. I think maybe Everspace would.
I think you might be right. Because they've been talking.
Everspace 2 is in Unreal.
Yeah, because they recently talked about, I think, updating it to the most recent version of Unreal. The ride racing games, Thorsten. Our newest proponent of the ride racing games on our server.
Sorry.
No. It's fine. It's fine. If you're gonna evangelize something you love. You know what I mean? Elder Scrolls, Chris? Oh, that's a good question. I think they use Gamebryo. I think.
Who makes Elder Scrolls?
Bethesda. And I think
they have their own.
I think they have their own. I think they have their own. It's called Gamebryo.
It's an in-house engine. No, it's the creation engine.
Yeah, that sounds right.
They did use Gamebryo. Now it uses the creation engine, which is technically based on Unreal in the same way that, like, you know, the Source is based on Unreal, and pretty much every major engine now is in some ways based on Unreal. But at that point, Theseus is on his third boat, so you know how it goes.
Oh, you're
right.
No, you're absolutely right, Jacob. I just looked it up because I don't think I'd ever heard of this creation engine, but you're absolutely correct. Oh, they're now up to the creation engine too. Whatever that means. When we see the next Elder Scrolls game in 2031, or whatever. I bet it'll come out before Star Citizen, though. Anyway.
That's a bingo, folks. That's a bingo.
No. Brian, no. We don't mention that game now.
Oh, wait. Creation Engine is a fork of Gamebryo? Oh, wow. I'm learning so much new stuff today. So back to Starcom. You said you did a big bunch of quality of life updates from the first game. Like, could you rattle some off for me? We talked about like a couple of them, but I'd love to hear some more because I love the first game, but I love quality of life stuff too. So I'm curious to know what.
I'm gonna have to kind of think for a second to come up with them because they were sort of all incremental throughout the process. But so like the smart autopilot was one of the big ones. Fog of exploration, fog of war was a recent one. So that's sort of like an optional tech that you can research that will show exploration on the map. So you can see like, oh, if there's like some void areas that I didn't, well, you obviously know what fog of war is, but basically that was a requested one that was added later on. One of the tricky ones, and it's sort of hard to put it into a category, but basically there's a lot more mission and story in this game versus the first one. And in the first game, one of the complaints was that there was just often not enough guidance. Like the mission tracking was just sort of like, it was more like Starflight. Like you found some clues and
which is fine.
Piece them together. Yeah, which is fine. But I think a lot of players expect to be able to get to the end of the game without having to like consult an online guide or having like read every single encounter dialogue. And so that was something there was a mission guide, there was like a mission log in that game, but it was not sort of built in from the start, and I don't think it had quite the level of kind of user tracking, sort of like keeping track of what areas they needed to investigate, the sub goals that they needed to accomplish.
I'm gonna be honest.
Was a big one.
I'm gonna be honest. I think that's why I petered out of the game, because eventually I'd be like, "Where am I going? What am I doing?"
Exactly. Yeah. So that was something. Some people love that. Some people love tracking and figuring stuff out. And I left some of that in, but I tried to make sure that it was all in optional content. Like, so like if there's some like secret, like, unlock the secret ending, you have to like solve some stuff, look at some images in a weird way or so forth. But for the main storyline, all the missions will be like, okay, your first officer has identified this mission as like a priority. And if you are, for example, there's something that you're supposed to figure out, like maybe you'll like notice that this trail of debris is leading somewhere. Most, maybe like 80 to 90% of players figure that out. But for the 10 to 20% of players who don't, eventually a crew member will, like, if the game says, okay, like they only have one active mission and it's been 15, 30 minutes since they reached this point, I think that they may not have noticed that, and they will say something like, I think it's worth checking out that, debris field again. There might be something we missed.
Oh, nice. Nice.
So that was, I think, a huge quality of life, and that's one that really has occupied a huge amount of the time, because just iterating on, like, I would create some content, and I'm very bad at guessing at what players will do, because like I'm in my head, it's like, oh, it's super obvious, like, or maybe I'll think this is going to be like a little bit of an Easter egg, and players will be like have fun figuring it out on their own. But I'll like estimate like I think 10% of players will figure this out, and it turns out to be like 0.5%. And I'm like, okay, there needs a little bit more guidance when in the analytics I see like the people who found like the secret way to like this is a little bit of a spoiler, so but there's like a really powerful race in one corner of the galaxy, and you learn that the Trade Guild has their ship that can go there, and they don't blow that one up. And if you read that, you sort of find out that the really powerful people are just sort of like think all the other races are beneath them and not worth their trouble. And there are some clues, and you eventually figure out that if you get your ship to match the colors, because you can customize your ship color to match the color of the Trade Federation, they'll just ignore you when you go into their system. And I think like 5%, of players will figure this out. I think one player figured it out during that cycle of the early access, and I was like, okay, clearly I overestimated that. I need a little bit more guidance. It should be hard to figure out, but not that hard to figure out.
Yeah, that is extremely obscure, primarily because previously the colors didn't do anything.
Yeah, and that's kind of one of the few spots that colors do anything. Like there are a few like Easter eggs where like someone will comment on something like that. But yeah, it's really, I think it was really, I kind of just way overestimated how much people would internalize what I thought was like, because I'd spent, a week working on this feature, and so it was like absolutely in the forefront of my mind, but it's not in the players exactly.
And I want to give another a special shout out. We've barely talked about today, but the shipbuilder in this game. When I tell people I usually don't like shipbuilding, except the first Starcom game, because you made such an elegant shipbuilder. Holy moly!
Thank you. Yeah. So that ties back, and I'm glad you brought that up because that reminds me that quality of life. There was a lot of quality of life stuff that was hard to implement. So the new shipbuilder is kind of an improvement on the old one. The old one had a very Lego-y look. It's the same system where there's hexes, but this one has multi-hex modules. And the modules, I hired a talented, I think it was a Polish modeler who did a really great job creating some of these modules so that the ships, I think, really look awesome compared to the first game. They look fine. They look fine for an indie game. But they were very distinctly Lego-y. Whereas this, you can make a ship that looks like a spaceship.
I saw that in the workshop. I saw that. Totally saw that in the workshop.
And then so there was a lot of quality of life in there. So, for example, undo, redo, multi-module editing. So you could take chunks of the ship apart and move those, so you didn't have to like move each individual bit. The ability to say like, oh, well, I don't have the tech and resources to build this ship yet, but I want to plan for that. So a design mode where you could, switch to design mode, build the ship that you want to get eventually, and then it will track the resources that you need so that when next time you're trading with another faction, you'll see in your like sidebar, okay, you need like 157 aluminum and 3 uranium to build your dream ship.
Oh, that's great. Oh,
once again, that's an amazing idea with a freaking
I gotta say,
workshop.
Yeah, I have to. That's an amazing idea, because I think there were a lot of times where I'd be like, okay, I want 2 more guns. What do I need for 2 more guns? I don't remember. Hopefully I have enough when I get back. Damn it, I don't have enough. Okay, go back out.
That probably means I could do a better job drawing attention to the feature, because it was kind of like I think it was added probably like 3 months ago, so pretty late in the process. But it definitely, I think, could use some hinting from the community.
No, I was talking about the first game. That was
the first one. Okay,
that's what I was doing in the first game. So I'm loving that this option is in the new one, the second one, because that'll make because that's what you're basically doing. You're saving up for new toys. That's basically what you're doing. So it's like if I have a shopping list of what I need, that's just fantastic. That is just great. Oh man.
Yeah, so the
It does make it
shipyard.
easier to set your priorities.
Yeah, so the shipyard had a lot of quality of the life stuff. So just and this is all. And I wanted to give a shout out to the early access players because they have been just great. I know like there's early access gets mixed. There's pros and cons to it, but I think that this really has done a lot for the game because the early access players have been really good at. Some people just play the game and don't give feedback. That's fine. I get some information from them, but there are some who just gave tons and tons of really useful suggestions. There's one player who managed to find all of these I spell checked the game and they found all these little tiny typos, and so the player feedback in early access was fantastic, but especially in the shipyard refinement, they were really good because I'm sure, as you can imagine, as the developer, you reach a certain level of blindness to the game where you're just I know I've built 1,000 ships. I know exactly how the shipyard works.
Yeah, it's the game development equivalent of always have an editor. If you're writing something substantial and people facing, always have an editor.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
I've played so many games where you can tell that the developer had no one play tested for them because you're playing this and you're like, what were they? How am I? What are you? What happened?
Yeah, I think the last time I checked, so there is in-game, and I stole this idea from Subnautica, that if you push F8 at any time, you can just bring up a window and type something in, and it will go to a database that I can see.
That's great.
And that turned out I have gotten so far 8,000 separate comments from that.
Wow.
From about, I think maybe 2,500 users.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And some of them are and oftentimes there's a lot of repeats. There's stuff okay, I know this, but there's oftentimes there's something that I just first learned about from a tester, and then then maybe a week later another tester says something very similar, and that jogs my mind to be okay, 2 people have said this, that I should be paying attention to this because that's something that probably needs fixing.
Yeah.
And I know it's yeah.
Yeah, no,
sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say playtesting is so valuable and important, and having that tool inside the game is. I haven't seen many games do a thing like that. And was that F8 thing? Was that hard to build at all?
I think yeah. So I had come, like I mentioned, I had come from a web dev background, and so for me it was actually pretty easy. But I can imagine that if you have no web experience, setting up a SQL database and web front end, that's kind of daunting. I kind of would be surprised if there's got to be some third party that's done this by now.
You would think.
It's so valuable. Yeah, it's so valuable that it would be if somebody hasn't done that, then somebody should be getting on that right now because that's really useful. Some analytics company needs to just be all right, here's our Unity plugin for F8. Download this and you can implement it instantly. But I watched a talk from Subnautica years ago, and I saw that, and I was oh, okay, I definitely need that. And like you said, testing, early access testers, play testers are just so incredibly valuable for indie devs because we just can't see it after a while.
Yeah, no, I'd never been really much of a playtester until I helped with this one game, Starfleet 2, and I never realized how valuable it was until I was one myself. And yeah, my God, it's so valuable. Devs, if you're listening, make sure you have people playtest your stuff that aren't friends or family. People that'll say no to you. That's important. Chris Roberts needs people who will say no to him. You know what I mean? Don't be Chris Roberts. Okay? Don't be a George Lucas. Get people that say no to you. Okay?
Yeah, initially it was hard to read negative feedback because you're kind of initially you take it personally, but after a while of reading I'm a little bit sensitive to criticism, maybe average, I guess. I don't think anybody likes criticism. But after a while of seeing it on through the early access, I started to appreciate that even if they were saying something that was kind of like critical of something I created, I did value it. I was like, they're doing me a favor, that they're the ones catching this, and it's not like, I'm not going to go into launch, and be surprised by problems.
Yeah, that's super important. We got to start wrapping up because it's over an hour, and we try to keep these things to around an hour. Is there anything?
Time flies.
I know, right? Is there anything you want to say about your game that we haven't covered yet? Anything you want to wrap up on?
Launch date is Monday, September 2nd, in 5 days. Everybody should buy 2 copies.
Love it. Yes.
Nice.
Perfect.
Yes.
Thanks for having me on. This was always a blast. I love being on your show.
Oh no, it was great. It was great. These games are a ton of fun. I love the vibe. The exploration again is just, for me. I mean, exploration is so. We could do a whole show on this. Exploration is hard to get right, and a lot of games try, and a lot of games fail. But you've got the wonder and awe AWE of exploration down really well in these games. So
thank you.
Major props on that, because space is a lot about exploration. That's what we love about Star Trek. All the exploration. So it's like, I mean, we all love the pew pew, don't get me wrong, but I want to discover stuff, So your game is great at both of those things, really. So like Kevin said, the game is Starcom Unknown Space. It comes out on Monday, which, hey, it's a holiday here in America. So if you have the day off, go buy a copy and play it. And then when you like it enough, go buy a copy for a friend. Like Kevin said, buy 2 copies. So friends, we are not going to have a show next week. I'm either going to have jury duty, or they put our weekly work meeting right before when we usually have the podcast, and they usually go over an hour. Yay. So no show next week. I'm sorry. I know we didn't do a show last week too, but what are you going to do? I might have jury duty. I'm not going to postpone it again. So got to do what you got to do, But Kevin, I want to thank you for coming on and talking to us.
Pleasure's all mine.
Pleasure's on this side of the table. Folks, thank you everyone in the chat. Great chat today. Please, everyone, take care of yourselves and each other. Please get vaccinated if you haven't already. My God, I don't think COVID was a thing when we had you on last. That's how long it's been. Maybe. But COVID's a thing now.
It feels like a decade ago.
I know, it really does. So COVID's a thing now, my friends. So please get your shots. Please wear your masks. They work. They really do. Thank you, as always, to our patrons to help pay for things like Restream, so we can all chat to each other. It's expensive. And always remember to wear your helmet. With that, what am I playing tomorrow? I don't remember. Oh, yeah. Tomorrow we're going to play Broadside Renegade.